Hey, this is Zach Log the Great, and I am here tonight with my friend Nate.
Hi.
And Chris.
Hello.
And Harry.
Good evening.
And we are joined tonight by one of the people behind the internet radio show Pinkerton's Ghosts, and that is Ben Wheeler.
Hello, hello.
And would you like to tell everybody a little bit about the show?
Pinkerton's Ghosts is a horror anthology podcast written and edited by myself and written as well by my two friends, Anthony Marchetta, who was published in God Robot, and Ken Dickinson, who has done several audiobooks for such luminaries as John C. Wright and others. You'll be happy to find us at UATV YouTube under the Superversive SF channel, and just other places around. We're updating our Spotify gallery even today.
Okay. And we are getting together tonight. Why? I think I've kind of lost track.
Yeah.
Does anyone remember? Does anyone remember what we're talking about tonight?
Oh,
I remember that it wasn't a sphere. So
Yeah,
there is basically only one. There is basically only one antimemetics joke. Oh, what joke is that? What joke's what? And Zach Log already made it. Go for it.
We are getting together tonight to talk about the book "There Is No Antimemetics Division" by QNTM. I want to say one thing quick, and I will probably repeat this in just a couple minutes. But this is not intended to be a book review in the sense of like you're going to listen to this to decide if this is something you want to read. This is kind of a discussion. It's going to go all over the place, and there will be spoilers all over. Okay, so having said that, if this Harry is going to tell us, Harry is going to give a brief description of the book in a moment. If it sounds interesting, you can either, I think you can read most of it online, or you can do as I did and buy a copy and read the book and come back. I will say I recommend it. It is a very interesting book. And Harry, would you like to tell us about to tell everyone about the general idea of tonight's book?
So there's two parts to this. The first part is the universe the book takes place in, the SCP Foundation. And as far back as recorded history goes, there are legends of monsters and ghosts and miracles, what we enlightened modern people might call paranormal phenomena. And logically, if these phenomena are still going on, there must be someone out there by now who studies and manages it. The U.S., at the very least, would have a three-letter agency to deal with it, and that agency is the SCP Foundation. The universe started off as some copy pastas on 4chan's Paranormal X board, but it's grown into its own universe, and these are the people that take all the horror story monsters and protect them from humanity and humanity from them, so that the rest of us can live in a sane, rational world. We secure, we contain, we protect is the motto. And that's where this book comes in. There is no antimemetics division. So this book says that there are monsters that can't be remembered. There are self-keeping secrets. There are contagious murders. There are anomalies that infect ideas the way a virus might infect a person. Sun Tzu once said that if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. In this book, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you lose. There is a war, and if you know you're fighting the war, you've already lost. And this book is about the people who fight it anyway. And that's about as much as we can say without getting into spoilers. So to reiterate what Zach Log said, if that sounds interesting, you should probably get the book before listening to the rest of the discussion, because we are going to spoil it.
And let's be real, you probably already read it.
That's entirely possible, yes.
I think so.
Okay, so Ben, as the resident, as the actual horror writer in this discussion, Would you like to step in with your initial thoughts on this book? What you found interesting and where it led you? I guess you could say.
Absolutely. It's no great secret that I have been heavily inspired by the SCP Foundation in my own work with Pinkerton's Ghosts. Even though the SCP Foundation has had its own ancestors in different detective novels, horror, even all the way back to H.P. Lovecraft, though the tropes weren't the same as we would know them, as with many things with that man. For the horror aspect of it, it's absolutely fantastic. I'll admit, I'm a very jaded soul when it comes to horror and humor and a whole bunch of other things. But there were some moments that got me, especially with the spiders. The spiders coming out of the very minds that know of them, and other horrible things of that nature. As the story goes, it is what it needs to be. The best parts of it are when it just lets itself ride through and focuses on the SCP Foundation itself, which is, of course, the major character in all the stories that it takes part in. The SCP universe works best when it is in the SCP Foundation, with all the flavor that you can add to it. Besides the spiders, the very idea of people simply not knowing things is incredibly compelling, especially for me, who does have just large parts of his life where I just don't know what went on. I was a kid, doing something. I don't know. That block fell through the floor though once. That was pretty weird. Better not think about it. And stuff like that. My own smattering of strange occurrences have led me to accept that I think most people don't remember most of what goes on, and perhaps they are much happier for it.
I have to say one thing. One thing that was interesting to me a lot is how many other books that I like at different points this book reminded me of. And they're not similar books either. And for one thing, and I had briefly talked about this with I should have brought that up. For one thing, I briefly talked about this with Hari Seldon. There's a part from G.K. Chesterton's book Orthodoxy that actually this book reminds me of a lot. I think I have a paper copy, but I'm probably not going to find it in there. I might find but in one of the chapters of Orthodoxy, he talks about the purpose of religious dogma and the purpose of all of religious authority is because the church realized that there are thoughts, there are ideas that if you think them will almost certainly destroy you. And the church said, we've got to fence those off. And it's really funny that it's I don't know for sure. Hari said he's under the impression that QNTM is a relatively left-leaning atheist. And it's kind of funny to me that there's this whole novel based on this premise from an atheist that is kind of spelling out a kind of fictionalized horror story version of what G.K. Chesterton said in his book like over 100 years ago.
Well, I mean, if the SCP that the book is, the book is telling the story of our battle against, when it showed up, everybody's talking about, yeah, we're in hell. And not like, oh gosh, this is hellish, but like we're in capital H hell. So, yeah, it is always a little bit amusing to watch, sort of the faithless rederive the concepts of Christianity, sort of, organically.
There was a scene that read almost like an exorcism. And in fact, I can't imagine that it wasn't deliberate, where you have a guy who's been infected by an anomalous idea, and an agent attempts to remove the idea and tells the idea to leave the universe and never come back. It reads way too much like an exorcism to be a coincidence, I think. I got the sense that this is not in any sense a Christian work. I got the sense that from time to time it wanted to be.
Well, and
Absolute agreement.
And the other thing you were saying about exorcism and possession, another one of the books that this reminds me of, there's a point where one of the characters looks around and like everyone in his immediate environment has been seized by SCP-3125, has been taken control of by this alien idea complex that basically destroys the rest of their mind. And he looks at these people, and all of a sudden, like, I want to see if I can find it. They look like people. Here it is. The orchestra is gone, all 70 of them. The things which have replaced them are not human, but alien, ill-proportioned pillars of pinkish-brown flesh. Each has, at its top, a heavy protuberance studded with goopy biological sensors and rubbery openings, and sprouting from the very cap, lengths of various kinds of vile, off-colored mess. They are draped in black and white fabrics, weirdly cut to either conceal or highlight their blobby, inconsistent body structures. And what he's doing there is describing a human being from the point of view of someone who is not familiar with how we look. And, basically, and then he's shocked, and he's like, wait a second, this is what humans have always looked like. And, he sees these people, and then some vital element of humanity is gone, and there's all the same things, but they're not quite people anymore. Which very much reminds me of Paralandra and the Unman, the possessed Dr. Weston in Paralandra, and how C.S. Lewis described that.
Oh yeah, like it's speaking of the heresy ideas, it's hard to, like, as a Protestant, as a Protestant among Protestants, it's hard to imagine that these ideas, can affect a man who is daily studying Scripture, who is carefully examining his way before the Lord. But I also know Seventh-day Adventists and Charismatics. All it takes is a little idea, and then you tie it to something as ineffable as God, and you start to change something that's fundamental about you yourself. Instead of praying, you're babbling into the sky without meaning. Even though you might want to put meaning to it, the conversation isn't there. And to bless somebody, they have to understand what you're blessing them with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like I said, this book really does throw down a lot of deeply religious themes, that some knowledge is corrosive to the soul. It's just that this places it outside the realm of human ideas and makes it a descending alien meme complex, which sounds like 4chan, but it's actually, supposed to be some almost extra dimensional threat. Like, they talk about how this is something from beyond our reality that's already corrupted and destroyed other universes aside from ours and is now coming for us. And so, but I mean, to bring it back to the sort of personal introspective, yeah. And what's interesting about the musician Wheeler, as opposed to SCP Foundation Dr. Wheeler, is that he has a sort of innate sensitivity to these things. And so it shows, he's shown as being sensitive to, and able to see through some of these like antimemetic properties. He can see through the veil, basically. And honestly, it just sounds like a wise man living a good life is in our reality able to defeat these soul corroding ideas because he sees through them. He sees through the veneer of good that gets laid on top of it to the actual parts that will destroy you that are underneath. So I agree with whoever said this wanted to be a Christian novel. I really do.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing with specifically him, although it's indicated there may be others like him, it's that they are the ones with an actual choice. They can give in or they can fight. And from their point of view, fighting is not going to work. It's going to be torture beyond the point where it's needed until they actually give up, just to enjoy causing them pain. But we are seeing with him specifically, like, yeah, even once he does give in, there's still that little bit of him that can find redemption.
Well, and but before I forget this, by the way, I mentioned this with Harry earlier. Ben, are you by any chance any relation of Marion or Adam?
Though I am a Wheeler, I am sadly unaligned with any particular female. But I will say, he did register to me as a Wheeler. I have noted in my family that we were either super normal people with almost no like internal voice, or like super crazy like artists, whatever you want to say. My sister's a doctor. I'm a writer. My dad has multiple master's degrees and has a shocking amount of fingers in the pies of the internal internet structure of our country, even though he never profited from it, autism. Then you have my mother, who is just nice and kind and one of the most well-read English ladies you've ever met. So and of course, spirituality runs in our family. I had a great uncle who was reputed to be so at peace with God and man and nature that predators would lay their heads in his lap. Stuff like that just runs through my family. He's very much a Wheeler, and it's freaked me out a bit, actually.
Yeah, but I mean, if, as it says in the book, if he stopped to gawk at every other person named Wheeler he ran into, he'd never get anything done. So Zach, give Ben a break here.
Oh, we're fun to watch sometimes.
And so, Chris, you haven't said much just yet. Would you like to?
Well, sort of riffing off of the sort of like religious overtones and stuff. As y'all are talking, I was thinking you kind of have like a sort of like a beast, like Antichrist vibe, where you have this entity that like is actively destroying humanity, but then you also have like a relatively human-like version of it that speaks on its behalf and has even survived gunshot wounds that should have been lethal.
By just ignoring them.
Yes. So I was like, wow, like that it was listening to y'all talking that I was like, oh yeah, like some of that almost had to have been intentional, or it's an impressive coincidence.
Oh, I did find, this is my copy of Chesterton's Orthodoxy. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. And he says, this is in chapter 3, The Suicide of Thought, which sounds like something out of this book. There is a thought that stops thought. That is the only thought that ought to be stopped. That is the ultimate authority against which that is the ultimate evil against which all religious authority was aimed. It was against this remote ruin that all the military systems in religion were originally ranked and ruled. The creeds and crusades, the hierarchies, and the horrible persecutions were not organized, as is ignorantly said, for the suppression of reason. They are organized for the difficult defense of reason. So, again, like I said, there's this book pinged off a lot of echoes for me, and that was one of the more interesting ones. And like, to be honest, one thing I kind of got the feeling of, like, you know, once about halfway through the book, okay. Well, I have to rewind. One odd thing about this book is, like, the SCP, like, their job is to, you know, investigate and contain anomalous creatures and items and events. And they're basically kind of like a, you know, police.
Much less funny.
What's that?
They're the Men in Black, but a lot less funny.
Yeah, but they're kind of like a police / you know, scientific research organization. And then in this book, you know, one particular part of them, not even the whole thing, one subgroup of them is basically has to wage a war, which is an entirely different kind of thing than containing a particular dangerous creature. And it's interesting to see that, and it's also, you also kind of see them realize that it's like, this is on a completely different scale than other things we've dealt with. We have a problem we don't know what to do with at all. But about half
put me on the book is that if you know that you have this problem, then you have realized what the problem is, and if you know what the problem is, it will kill you.
Well, and that's another interesting thing. Like, okay, a meme is an idea that wants to spread, an idea that by its nature wants to go from one person's head to another person's head. An anti-meme is an idea which does not want to spread, things we naturally want to keep secret. And then there are anomalous anti-memes, like there's ordinary ones, things that all of us, you know, just don't want to talk about. But there are anomalous anti-memes which, you know, erase themselves from people's mind or don't let people talk about them. And it's kind of funny because you know, one way, and you know, this will to some extent work in the real world. One way to, you know, keep a secret is to kill everybody who knows. And SCP-3125 actually doesn't erase people's memories. It just knows when you know about it, and either takes you over or kills you, which is a different kind of anti-meme than most of the rest you encounter here.
Well, I mean, that's why, and it kills you specifically by putting spiders in your brain in a lot of cases. But you can't be purely abstract. You can't have a good story, I think, with without ever getting into concrete details. And so, yeah, in this case, the concrete detail is there are spiders that will kill you that will spawn in your brain if you think the wrong things.
Well, and there's also like skyscraper-sized versions of these things that are apparently walking around, and just none of us perceive them 99% of the time.
They will split you in half.
Yeah, one of the things that I like about that is because there's some like real world overlap where just psychologically, if you're not looking for something, your brain may not even register it. There was one time where I was in, you know, luckily a minor car accident. I was at a bad 4-way intersection. I was so worried about looking left and right. I did not see the person coming straight at me, and I turned into them. But it's like, I know my eyes passed over them, but my brain registered it as an empty road. And then you have all the accidents involving like motorcycles, where it's like you're not looking for a motorcycle, you don't see them on the road. So there is that sort of like overlap with real things, where you fail to see things that physically exist. And then you just sort of take that and extrapolate out. And it's like, well, wait a second, what if something has figured out how to exploit this?
Well, and there's
the dinosaur monster thing, like the massive antimemetic just browsers that were strolling around, and like they're mountain-sized creatures, but their antimemetic field is so strong that when somebody actually took a picture of one and had irrefutable evidence of it, it died. All its defenses and ability to live were stripped away, and it just flopped over dead. So, yeah, I mean, it's a crazy idea.
I actually just thought of another book that this one reminds me of an entirely different kind. I hope everyone here is familiar with this. I know some of you are.
Yes, SCP field.
Yep. Somebody else's problem.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Well, to be more specific, the life, the universe, and everything, which includes the SEP field. It makes things invisible, not by actually changing anyone, like moving light rays or affecting people's eyes. It just exploits people's inborn ability to ignore things that they can't make sense of.
I did particularly like the scene in which that showed up, in which Ford is trying to get Arthur for like an entire chapter to pay attention to this one area, and Arthur just can't do it, and he can't figure out what Ford's talking about. There's nothing weird here. There's nothing. And then finally, at the end of the chapter, he looks at it and says, oh, you mean the giant spaceship? When they're in a field that has no evidence of a giant spaceship up to that point.
Also, like Discworld's death. Like the adults they see a sort of indistinctly featured person. They don't hear the timeless boom of his voice. He just sounds like a guy. And so everybody's like, I'm unsettled by this fella, but I don't know why. But all the kids are like, it's freaking death, guys.
Yeah, there's also some Doctor Who villains. I think they're called like the Silence, where whenever the heroes are facing them, they're marking down on their arms tally marks how many of them they're seeing. So throughout the episode, like when they're not looking at them, they don't know they're there, and then they look down at their arms and it's just covered with marks.
In fact, that's probably the closest analogy to this that I've seen on screen is the Silence from Doctor Who.
But what was? Oh, go ahead.
There are tricks that even normal people can use to be unseen, even among crowds and with people looking at you. It's like you got to just look like you belong. I used to torment a girlfriend of mine by just sitting in plain sight and just not waving to her when I saw her. And she wouldn't be able to see me. She would just like look around, leave, and then I'd walk behind her and she'd be like, where'd you come from? I'm not going to say that relationship lasted very long, but it was very fun for me.
Wonder why.
I mean, I've been wearing a red shirt I've been wearing a red shirt in a dark green chair. Sitting there, watched like several TV shows with my siblings, just kind of keep them on, I was there when everybody else arrived. And so, they all come in, run out, talk, we're watching TV. I get up to leave. They all holler, like, when did you get here? I'm like, I have been here the whole time. I used to do that to a friend of mine when we play paintball together. You train, your eyes want to notice certain things. Like you want to notice movement, first of all. Movement, shape, color. So what I would do is I'm wearing like sky blue t-shirt. But I just sat down in front of a bush so that my outline was fuzzy, despite the bright blue shirt, and just watched him. And he walked up, like, looking around, trying to find me. And he walked up within, like, 20 feet of me, and I was like, boop! Smoked him. He's like, oh, God! Where were you? I'm like, I was right here the whole time.
I can't say too much about this without ruining it for people who aren't familiar. Have you guys seen the video where
Yes.
There's a group of people standing in a circle and they're passing a basketball among each other, and they ask you to count the basketball passes? Are you familiar with this?
Yes.
Okay.
Ben, cover your ears. This is actually seeing this for the first time is quite an experience.
I don't think I want to ruin it for people who haven't seen it. Maybe I'll put a link in the show description. I'll send a link to Ben. You can.
They have you counting basketball passes, so you're very focused, expecting a trick. And then afterwards, you're like, so how many passes did you count? You're like, 47 or whatever. I forget. They're like, did you also? And then you're just like, wait, what? Then they replay the video again, and you're like,
wow. Anyway, yeah, so that's another example of this. But
so a lot of the stuff we've just been talking about is basically what's behind like all of stage magic, which makes me wonder if there's something about like an anti-meme where it's just making you focus on something else more than like a property of the actual like item. Like it just makes everything around it more interesting.
Well, there's another similar one in the Dresden Files. There's one where it's actually the second book, I think, and he's trying to sneak into somewhere. Harry Dresden is trying to sneak into somewhere. Theoretically, he could make an invisibility potion, but he doesn't have the energy and the time. That's very difficult. So he makes one that it doesn't make him invisible. It just makes him horribly, completely and totally uninteresting. And he drinks this, and basically people pay no attention to him whatsoever. Which then becomes a problem when something goes very wrong, and he has to get people's attention, and he's like shouting in this man's face, "Look behind you!" And the guy's like, "What? What are you talking about? I don't." Anyway.
Later, man.
But to use the phrase of this show, get back to the poem or book in this case. One thing, but yeah, about halfway through the book, SCP-3125 basically wins the war. Okay, it takes over Earth. It arrives in full, and basically the Antimemetics division just lost. Period. Done. And you see bits of what it does to people. You see bits of what happens, and there's one part where it says smash beautiful things. Find someone weaker than you and break them. And this alien ideology that is incompatible with continued human life, and loves to destroy beauty. And I'm like, I kind of feel like we're actually living this right now. I mean, I look at some of the things that are being promoted. I look at transgender ideology, and people who are, in the name of somehow protesting climate change, going to art museums and vandalizing art. And also just like what modern art and postmodern art, and things that are basically destroying the very idea that beauty is something that matters, and attacking it and tearing it apart wherever they can find it. I feel like SCP-3125 is kind of here.
And there's a very specific word, and it might be a coincidence, but the word is dysmorphia. And this is used a lot in the context of the book. One of the good guys, one of the heroes, accidentally got his consciousness transferred into a giant germ. It's a long story, and he still has a job to do. He still has a war to fight. He still has his duty, and so he keeps going on. And he said, and the narration mentions that it's pretty awful at first, having this complete mismatch between mind and body, because he thinks of himself obviously as a human being, and now he's a foot-sized green blob. And it says dysmorphia alone almost killed him. But notice what he doesn't do. Yeah, it's bad, and it takes him a while to get used to it, and he's suffering. But he does not chop up his germ parts to make himself resemble a little homunculus. When Adam Wheeler shows up, he doesn't demand to know if he looks like a true and honest human. And when Adam Wheeler would inevitably respond, no, you kind of look like a cubic acre of green, he doesn't call Adam a transgermaphobe. I could easily be reading too much into it, and QNTM would have to disavow me and Zachlog and Nate and Ben and Chris and all the people watching this video for good measure. I could be reading too much into it, but that is an interesting choice of words there.
Yeah, so, well, I mean, in that case, it is literally a mind in the wrong body, you know? And so, yeah, okay, dysmorphia is perfect for that because that's actually the condition he's in.
Yeah.
But I think it's really, also really fits.
But also the other thing is, go ahead, Harry.
Oh, just to finish the point. The point is that his response was to adapt to it and to accept that, okay, this is how this is how my life is now. Even if I don't like it, I've got to get used to it as best I can.
Well, and the other thing, the physical reality is the thing you have to deal with and you have to, at some level, accept first. And, and he doesn't, like, he's not comfortable with the idea. His idea of himself and his body don't match. But if he had spent energy trying to match his body to his mind, he would have destroyed himself and lost any hope of winning. So yeah,
but
Nate or Chris.
Well, what also interests me is that rather than struggle against it, rather than try and edit the body, what he actually does is he makes the body incalculably, well, I guess it's calculably, but just incredibly more vast. Like he's like, okay, I have to be this thing, but now that I need to do more things, I need to be this thing even more. And so he tailors an entire stadium-sized complex to expanding and keeping up with this new suboptimal body. And so, yeah, it's a super awesome resilience point. And, it's all right, that was a pretty cool move on the character's part because, yeah, he said he takes a handicap and just overruns it entirely.
And Chris,
you were...
Yeah, so to go back a little bit to the more general point you were making, Zachlog, so, we know that there are powers and principalities in the world, and some people like to think of them in more spiritual terms, but even if you only want to speak materially, it's look, there are social movements that become the norm where it's the ways that different types of insanity manifest are tailored to culture. It's we've seen in the US, if a school kid is upset over something, in the culture there's this idea of shoot up the school or something. There are these things that even in just pure sociological terms can take effect. So the idea of hey, there's this entity that we have to fight that's infiltrating our minds, there is an element of truth to that. And I think that's kind of the role of the church, is to identify those things and to bring people away from it. Because there are evil entities that are out there. There are evil ways of thinking, and they have to be identified and called out.
And that actually reminds me of something, and this was from several years ago, and because it's a blog, I would have a hard time finding it. I suspect Harry might be able to. He's good at such things. But on this one blog I followed for a while, Ace of Spades HQ, there was one post he made where he says, there are ideas that by their nature exclude other ideas. If you hold idea A, you cannot hold idea B. Also, there are ideas that are either individually or societally suicidal. There are ideas that if you hold them, they are quite likely to destroy you. And he said, like, you don't have to, believe in... Actually, I don't know if he named Christianity. I don't remember. It was obvious to me that this was part of it. But, like, if Christianity is a dominant influence in your society, there are a lot of ideas that are not going to be able to get a hold because Christianity walls them out. And we know Christianity, at least, in some form, is not a suicidal idea because societies that held it have survived in some form for 2,000 years. Christianity is losing influence has been losing influence in a lot of the West, and a lot of ideas have come in instead, and it seems pretty clear to me that a lot of those ideas are suicidal, are the kind of ideas that destroy anyone who is unfortunate enough to accept them. And this book seems like a fictionalization of that very problem.
Yeah, one of the ways that I like to put it, because like you have these other people that are saying things, doing things you disagree with, but I think as a Christian, the thing to keep in mind is the human being, like that's not your enemy. They're the hostage. The end goal is like, okay, how do we deliver them from that? And it's not always going to be possible, but at one point, like inherent to Christianity is the fact that we were the ones opposed to God, and rather than destroy us, he recognized us as being the hostages and he freed us.
For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and the spiritual force of evil in the heavenly realms. Ephesians 6:12.
Yep.
Awfully hard to remember sometimes because there are some pretty terrible people out there. That is my greatest struggle as a Christian. Is that whole love your enemies thing. So I'm like, I can put love and my enemies in a sentence, but there's usually more words.
As I believe G.K. Chesterton said, Chesterton said, our Lord told us to love our enemies and also to love our neighbors because they're frequently the same people.
Well said.
Well,
I mean, this whole idea, and ultimately what they do in the book is they try and their whole goal is to deploy an idea on a scale and at a power high enough that it basically interferes with and cancels out 31 whatever, the evil SCP. And they eventually do it. But, this whole point about, some philosophy, some ideas, some, ways of being, insulate you from destructive ideas, again, is exactly what the book is talking about, and it exactly mirrors real life. And I think the reason that Christianity is so good at fostering stable societies is because it leads you to a few things that you need to build them. You need objectivism. There's, outside of how you feel about it, outside of even what you may be able to prove, there are some things that are just true. 2 + 2 is 4. God exists. Get over it. It's like you are born at odds with him. You're going to need to deal with that. We're all going to die. What's going to happen after that? Kind of up to you. So, it also leads you into, ideas of contemplation and, vigilance against our, the evil of our natures. Just, it puts you in the right place. And so, it kind of turns you into Adam Wheeler in a sense, in that you, as I said earlier, you can see through, the attractive veneer to the destruction that lies beneath, some of these other ideas like, subjectivism or nihilism. You have a purpose. The idea that everything's meaningless, so you don't need to worry about it. Trust me, that's going to worry you a hell of a lot more than, no, there is an ultimate purpose and you need to find yours.
I think it's interesting that monster is more or less a nihilistic force in the world and in the surrounding sort of things, just because it destroys everything good and beautiful and true, and it itself, if I may spoil, I am going to spoil. You better watch out. You better plug your ears with cotton or something. When the monster itself turns out to be nothing but lies, sort of like the nothing Sophotech from John C.
Golden
Wright's
Age.
Gold. Yes, I think we should.
Zach made the same comparison.
Well, there was something else from the Golden Age that this reminded me of, but you finish that before I get to mine.
Certainly, and the world we live in is often a absolute maelstrom of lies. The amount of mental gymnastics the average Confucian has to utilize in his daily walk through the garden of Chinese society is absolutely insane. As well, and sometimes it just comes down to don't notice it. Look away. In other cultures, especially ones with much more strong martial histories to them, like the Japanese, there is a truth to it, even if you politely deny it. I've studied their language a bit. Like, sometimes they imply that you asking for something is, of course, you can ask for it, but you're a jerk for it. But if I were to say it in English, there's no direct translation because we simply do not believe the same way they do about propriety and when the rules must be broken and when they must be accepted. So rather than this thing being some sort of direct cultural thing, it's a devil. It is as if the devil threw his power out and just let it ride around a bit just to see what it would do. It turns out the devil's power is mostly just lies and emptiness, and can be dismissed with some cold, hard truth, though one might have to beat somebody over the head with a Bible for them to get it.
Well,
that was against Mr. Gray, I guess.
Yes, that is. Well, one interesting thing about the book, the first few chapters, I was actually getting the impression that this is kind of a loosely connected set of short stories. And I'm guessing that's how those first few chapters were written before the whole thing actually gelled into a complete book. Because like chapters 1 and chapter 2, you could actually read chapter 1 and just stop. You could read chapter 2 entirely independent of anything else in here and just stop, and it makes sense. Chapter 3 starts to pull into a larger story. But one thing that John C. Wright's Golden Age. Do I have any of them? I'm never entirely sure which books I have and which books I've borrowed from the library. I don't think I have any of the Golden Age books, but one thing that reminded me of, this reminded me of that. At the end, Adam Wheeler, who managed to survive, and escape the clutch of SCP-3125, makes it to meet Bart Hughes, and say, how are we going to, I have these things, how are we going to do this? And Bart tells him, you don't have what we need. Sorry. And then, there's Marion Wheeler, his wife, who was actually part of the Antimemetics division. She gets killed earlier in the book. And, not only does she get killed, she basically gets double killed.
Yes, there is an afterlife, and the SCP Foundation has a mobile task force there. And 3125 kills them too.
But basically through Adam Wheeler's memory of her, they managed to bring her back, and she has / is the idea that is needed to defeat 3125. But one thing I liked about this, and one thing that was in the Golden Age, the climax of the Golden Age, you have this the man and the woman, and a married couple. Neither of them alone are sufficient for the job. Adam Wheeler survives. Adam Wheeler fights to where he needs to be. He does not have the idea. Marion Wheeler, has the idea, has this, basically kind of has a plan, even if she doesn't really know it. But she gets killed. Neither of them separately are sufficient, but the two of them put together are able to win through, and that is part of the conclusion of the Golden Age. And I liked that there, and I like it also here.
That does lead me into my one nitpick of the book. The one thing that actually bothered me, and that is at the very beginning, it's mentioned that Marion Wheeler, 49 years old, has a loving husband who we later find out is Adam, and 2 sons.
Oh, does it say they have kids?
Yes, and it mentions it once, and then the children are never mentioned again. And for 90% of the book, I kept thinking, oh, they obviously were casualties of war. They got erased first. But even at the end, when Adam takes what's known as the Class Z amnestic, which permanently destroys your ability to forget and kills you, but you can remember everything, he doesn't mention them. And so I don't know if QNTM is married. If he is, I'm guessing he doesn't have children, because I can't imagine the children being a throwaway line if you have them. So it bugged me. I very much liked that neither one of them alone was enough, even though they were both good people. But it bugged me that the children were not mentioned again.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant plot hole. And the other
there.
Go ahead.
That's a Chekhov's misfire right there. We mentioned the gun, and then we never fired it.
It's likely an artifact from a previous version or from the short stories.
More than good point.
Else.
Yeah.
Like I have 100 episodes of Pinkerton's Ghosts under my belt. I can't find half the plot points I've laid out with a divining rod, much less any of my co-authors.
You don't have someone whose job is continuity editor. And even people who do have someone whose exclusive job is continuity editor still miss things like that once in a while.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert on SCP, but I've read a good many of them, watched YouTube videos, and there are reoccurring characters, so it could be that the kids were important in a story that would have just been just wouldn't have fit in the collection.
So it's them not being there for most of the story. Again, that didn't bother me. It's the fact that when he starts to remember everything that the war had taken, he starts to remember how life should have been and how it used to be before it all got eaten away and erased. It's the fact that they just weren't mentioned. That's what bothered me. But you and Ben are probably right that this might well just be an artifact of how it was written.
By the way, I have that page.
5 years.
I have that page here.
I'm gonna get into James on the story. The whole part about the noosphere bugged me because that comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, hey, if you take enough nestic drugs, then you're gonna end up in this mind space where your soul lives on. And that's never even hinted at until that moment. It's like, oh hey, here's another thing.
So that as it turns out is an artifact.
Yeah.
In the SCP Foundation, the Noospherics division exists as well, and the guy who wrote it had written a bunch that took kind of wove the stories in with the Antimemetics division stories, and then left the site. And then the question is, well, all right, I can either ignore the plot lines or try to work it in somehow. Yeah, that's definitely not ideal, but I at least understand where it came from.
I kind of clacked my teeth. I was like, what is this? This kind of hit me out of nowhere.
On the other hand, the entire book is dealing with just the concept of ideas that have power. So the idea that if you are involved in this world, when you die, you become an idea that still has some power. It makes some sense, but it was a little jarring.
I do like the sort of deconstruction of the notion that, oh, you're not really dead as long as people remember you. Because this shows you, okay, well, here's what happens when you're forgotten. It's not pleasant.
Well, go ahead.
When it comes to the noosphere, it didn't bother me much at all. Partially because I just kind of believe in it. Like at some point, like enough humans have enough traits that are the same that we can understand each other to a point. Plus, information must transfer between heaven, hell, and earth through some means. I don't mean like there's literally a telephone wire between heaven and hell or whatever, but information that makes up ourselves is transferred with our mind, quote unquote, we'll say, is transferred with our soul to heaven. Therefore, the weird little bits of trivia that make up every human being on Earth must somehow have some value beyond the weird sparks that fire off inside my head whenever I look at ducks, for example.
Yeah, I think Dallas Willard actually touches on a similar idea in The Divine Conspiracy, but I don't know if y'all are familiar with Dallas Willard, but that is a very dense book. So I'd be happy if I got just like a quarter of what he was trying to throw out there.
That was all interesting stuff, but all I'm going to take from this is that Ben Wheeler says that Jacob's Ladder is a giant electrical transmission tower stuck through eternity.
No, the Jacob's Ladder.
I'm 100% getting that tattooed now. It's Ben Wheeler's head.
No, what are those things on the cranes that go up and down? I can't remember what they're called offhand.
Space elevator?
Yeah, sure. It's more like a space elevator. Though I'm trying to think of, like an electrician is in a little box, the box rises up. I can't remember. Excuse me.
Man lift, cable car, boom.
Sure.
Funicular?
Power
If it's
crane.
diagonal, it's called a funicular.
Oh, semaphore?
Sure.
No, semaphore is a communication.
Flag.
Yeah.
So one thing that I liked about this book, and I don't think from the way the book had been going up until that point, I don't think I expected this. I've talked about this a few other times in other book discussions. It seems to me that like in adventure stories, and you kind of or there's basically two different kind of ways you could classify how the hero wins. One is the hero wins by being clever. The hero wins by being smarter, by figuring out some trick, and by maybe fudging the rules to get to the victory. The other way is the hero wins through courage and self-sacrifice. And I've read some of Type 1 stories. I've read some of clever hero stories that I like and that are interesting stories. I think on the whole, far better stories are the stories where the hero wins through courage and self-sacrifice. And just by the nature of this story up until that point, I did not expect this to be a hero wins through courage, hero wins through self-sacrifice, and that's the kind of story it ended up being. And I liked that element of it too. that, oh, Adam Wheeler, you're gonna get to save all of humanity, all of them. Well, all the ones that are left, at least.
The very concept of humanity.
Yeah. You have to die. Not only do you have to die, you have to die while seeing how much has already been ripped away from you. You have to die, and you're going to be forced to relive what was done to you while this thing was running you. And, and look back at your life and see huge sections of it that were ripped away from you, either by 3125 or to protect you. And Marion, you're going to save humanity. You already died, and you're going to have to again. Basically a third time. Sorry. And, they win. Like, the cleverness matters. They had to think. They had to plan. Bart Hughes had to spend, decades working on this and putting this whole thing together. But what it ultimately comes down to is you've got to let go. You've got to, lay down your life for the rest of us. And in general, I think that's a better story.
Yeah, that's why like the first Doctor Strange movie was just fantastic and had me thinking about it for weeks. And then the second one, I was like, well, that was entertaining, I guess.
The first Doctor Strange movie, the whole time I kept thinking, how is Doctor Strange, who's been a wizard for all of 5 minutes, going to do something that a wizard who's 100 years old couldn't figure out how to do? He's not going to be that smart. He's not going to be that clever. He's not going to be able to just brute force it. And I really like the fact that the solution wasn't, oh, the previous wizard could do it, but it's not going to be fun. It's a moral conviction, not so much a technical challenge. It was a much more satisfying way to end that movie than the other way would have been.
I love that. I really enjoyed that too, because his whole approach is basically, I'm going to annoy you until you kill me, until you get tired of it. Like, I'm just basically going to run up on your space and like, neener, 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 until you obliterate me however you want to, but then I'm popping right back in. And I believe we were at neener, neener, neener.
Yeah, there's just something about that ending where, like, they just choose the self-sacrifice, especially like in some cases, it's like you have other options, which almost everybody else would have gone for the other option, but you're choosing this one. And yeah, like it's so rare that a good piece of media does that, but whenever it does, it is satisfying on a whole nother level than just, oh, I was stronger than you, or I was smarter than you. It's like, no, I was willing to sacrifice everything, and that's why I won. And
sacrifice doesn't just mean death either. There was a scene right before the end when Adam Wheeler is told, sorry, you're missing that last component that we need. After making this nightmare of a trek, multiple chapters dealing with the horror that is the world now. And the narration says, Wheeler takes a deep breath, he squares his shoulder and says, all right, where is it? I hope it's in North America. I don't want to have to go back all the way to Site 41, but I will if you can wait that long. He's not just willing to die. He's willing to live in a way that's excruciatingly painful in order to get the job done. That's genuine strength.
Sacrifice is incredibly important for the Christian life because truth is a heavy burden. There are many choices that have been in my past that if somebody had decided to lie to me, I would have been a much different person. I would not seek the Lord or serve the Lord, even as pathetically as I do, because I would have assumed something that's a lie. The strange things I've experienced in my life do not lead me away from the Lord just because they're spooky, but rather they lead me to Him because it led me to seek that truth. And every Christian must eventually reach that truth in their own life, that they have sinned before God and they need Jesus Christ to avoid God's wrath, to avoid hell. When Jesus Christ resurrected, He showed the lie in death. We were not meant to die. And as the new Adam, He conquered death. But it's not easy, because ultimately the Christian is called to lay everything down for the Lord, to walk 2 miles for the Roman soldier, to turn the other cheek. And some people say you only need to turn the other cheek once, but there's more to it than just some sort of proud, declaration of self. We submit self to the truth of Scripture. We do not submit self to the lie of the world. For, as Owen Benjamin says, sorry for nuking your channel, lollipops and fancy pants.
There are a number of things I don't agree with him on, but man, that he's killer at coming up with those phrases. What was there's where is it? There's one moment I really loved in here, and it's near the end.
I know the moment I can read it if you'd like.
Well, and it's well, go ahead. We'll see if you have it.
So the moment he's talking about is when Marion is about to face off with SCP-3125 for the final time. And it says, but her perspective is still shifting. And as she ascends, ceasing to be human, she sees through the adversary and comes to understand how it is structured and how it is faulty and how those faults can be attacked. Inside its maw, human existence, all humans and all things humans had ever done, said, thought, or been are burning alive. SCP-3125 is in large part the lie that SCP-3125 is inevitable and indestructible, but it is a lie.
Yeah, and just the idea, part of the lie, part of what is killing people is the idea that this is inevitable, that this is, well, and to, connect it back to something I said earlier, it reminds me of phrases I see going wrong. Oh, such and such is on the wrong side of history. Which is the idea which is actually like directly out of Karl Marx. It's the idea that history has this kind of, inevitable progression in a particular direction, and that there's a future, and in terms of ideas and in terms of like ways to live, there's a future side and a past side, and there's not really a right or wrong. There's just, are you on the side that is coming, or are you on the side that is dying? And it's like, no, it's not inevitable. And whether it is progress, whether it is coming or whether it is going, I don't care. Is it true? Is it is it good? Is it true? Is it beautiful? That's the things that should matter. And again, like I said, that so much of this, and so much of this, like once you see how 3125 is actually running, reminds me of what we're living with today. Yeah. Oh, one other interesting thing I had here. I had noted here. There is an idea in literary analysis because I'm an English major. Chris also with me there. I don't know about anyone else here. But there's this idea called
American Sergeant.
But there's this idea called a dramatic irony, which is when the audience knows something that a character doesn't know. And it's a way of creating interesting situation and creating tension. And the entire structure of this book and the ideas that this book is written around are the best ways to create dramatic irony that I've ever seen. Because you can have like 5 people all sitting together and talking about something, and okay, how are we going to deal with this? Look at this thing that's happening, and then like 10 minutes later, none of them remember it.
And also, there's only 4 of them now.
Yeah, well, in one scene, 2. Well, one of them was killed, and one of them was kind of killed. But yeah, and it's the best tool I've ever seen of creating dramatic irony. It's kind of an interesting way of setting up this book. Something that
it was interesting that scene to watch Bart Hughes rederive all the strategies that the other people in the room already know he had put forward. He's kind of like, wait, there's a what? How do you even fight? Hold on. It would have to do this. Then they just basically hand him a research paper that he wrote, and they're like, you wrote this 5 years ago. He's like, oh crap, I never even heard of this. Then he starts reading, and he's like, I wrote this. I have no idea when I wrote this. But this is very definitely me. Okay, so then, hold on. With what I'm telling myself, flip, flip, flip. Yep. It's not doable. Well, hold on. We'd have to flip, flip. Yeah, that. We'd have to do that. And that's horrifying. But maybe if we can flip, 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 flip. Ah, yep, there it is. Okay. So when are we going to start building this? Hold on. Flip, flip. Oh, it's done. So we're just deciding to shoot or not. I mean, that was a great scene. I enjoyed that so much. Just watching them. Genius.
I've done programming where I have to edit someone else's code, and no doubt the poor souls who've had to edit my code have had to deal with something similar, where you think of something and then you think, well, wait a minute, the other person probably thought of this, and then you go and look and see, well, is it done already? And I've also had it working with my own code, where I'm trying to figure out what past me was talking about, and what in the world this block even means. And this is taking that to the logical extreme, I think. You are cooperating with your future self. Your future self is a real person, and you care about him, and you want him to be set up as best as possible. And what are you going to do right in the here and now to make that happen?
And one other thing I found interesting here, kind of on a related note, like Adam, makes his after the again. It seems like most of our discussion of the book itself is after 3125 wins. I don't know why that is, but
because most
after
3125 wins is like it's loops. It's everybody remembering, oh, we need to fight 3125. I better not think about 3125 anymore. And then occasionally he picks off one of them or a base, and then you're like, oh crap, okay, and then it all starts over again. And so there's only really the whole kernel of the first half of the book is this tight loop of holy shit, 3125 is a problem. We're going to think about this. Oh, we thought too far. We have to reset. And then it does it again. And it just scribes the loop in a slightly different way. But it tells the same sort of story loop a few times. And so things really only make progress and become, like linear in a plot fashion after 3125 is
after the end.
Well, and so one thing kind of interesting to me, okay, Adam makes his way to Site 41, and finds it destroyed and doesn't find the thing he needs there. But then I think he had been given instruction. I think they had told him about Site 167, or I don't know. I don't remember where he gets that information, but he gets.
He grabs the key card off of it and gets unlimited access to the
to the whole database, to everything.
But
and it mentions offhand that, like so many new SCP members before him, he loses countless hours browsing the entries, which I did think was for anybody who's ever been on the site, that's accurate.
Yes.
Chris, go ahead. You were saying?
Oh, I was agreeing. Was it a wiki walk? Like when you first discover it, if you happen to hit upon one that you find really interesting, there's going to be several hours where you're just going into everyone connected to it are just random numbers. But yeah, so one thing that I did like, though, is if you've spent any time on the site just reading random ones, sometimes they try, like, there are some of the authors that portray the Foundation as just being like unnecessarily cruel, almost for no reason, or just kind of like shadowy and evil. And some of those are kind of fun. It can be overdone, but I do like the way it was portrayed, like in the novel, where like they were the good guys, at least the ones that we were seeing. I thought that was really interesting because, like, that's kind of how I would like to think an organization like that would be. But also, I thought it was interesting. So after the war, everyone just kind of gets back to their normal life and they forget about the missing time. But we're told that a lot of the SCPs escaped during that time. So I'm like, what's going to happen? Like, they're reading the files on this stuff and they're like, wait, where is this? Like, one moment it's there, one moment it's not. Is this another anomalous property of the thing or not?
Well, and yeah, the one of the 05 directors, is having having this kind of introspection at the end, and at least a few of them know that this has happened, know that something happened, although none of them have any idea what. And also, what is it? Large parts of every major urban center are basically blocked off from human consciousness. There's something physically there, but no one can approach it or is even aware that there's something there, which is just this another interesting gap.
Yeah, they should start an Antimemetics division.
That would be a good idea.
But like so there are at least parts of the SCP Foundation that know something happened and know that have some idea why SCP-682 escaped and needs to be hunted down.
Gosh.
You know which one that is?
Yep.
That's the hard to kill reptile.
Yes. Okay. Anyway, but the what was arg? Oh, so one thing I liked, and it's not actually addressed, it's not actually talked about, but like Adam Wheeler makes his way to Site 167, which, as far as Marion knew, all that was left of the Antimemetics division was Site 41. And whenever they had their meetings, and in the containment unit, when we're able to talk about 3125, they were like, there used to be a dozen antimemetics organizations around the world addressing these problems. We're the only one left, And by the way, we used to have like 5,000 people. Now there's about 100 left of us. And then, but Adam is able to make his way to Site 167, which apparently none of them were even aware of anymore. And it's, kind of this idea like, oh, you feel like you're alone. Everything has been stripped from you, and you have to face down, this thing by yourself. No. Okay? There are other people out there, fighting this with you. You might not ever know. You might not ever meet them, but there's more out there. And it's actually, reminded me of, I had to look up, I don't actually know I don't actually know any of these references. I'm just pretty good at finding them. Usually, it reminds me of Elijah in, is it 1 Kings 18?
I was just thinking.
Yeah, and I don't here. I don't have it here, but like Elijah is like,
I have the story
God
clearly in mind. And he's like he's sitting there in his little cave in a ravine. He's like, God, just let me die. I'm the last one. I'm the last servant you have. The hand of the king and all the nation is against me. Just, I want to pack it in. I want to die. And God's like, there are 7,000 right now that if I called them would serve me. Like, so, no, that's not how this is going. But I want to use you. So why don't you eat something? And let's keep moving. And I'm just kind of like, just that sort of thump on the forehead, that he gets. But he gets it as almost a rebuke, but it's a very hopeful message.
So there is one thing we haven't really addressed yet, and actually this was one of the things Harry. Oh, one thing I didn't say. This book was Harry's suggestion as a topic for discussion, and one of the things he said was that he would find it interesting to talk to a Christian writer about writing horror fiction, and so we do have someone who actually does that on a regular basis, and I wonder if you'd like to talk about horror fiction and Christianity and what you think what a Christian writer can and can't do, and how you would relate that to this book.
There's a lot to it. The first thing is you have to be grounded in truth. You have to know what is true. One of the ultimate truths of Christianity is that God has already won. I make it clear in Pinkerton's Ghosts at multiple stages that God is above everything and the Christian doesn't really need to fear anything. However, I also make it clear that the physical threats of the world must be dealt with. And so, I basically take the Monster Hunter International, standard and throw enough lead at any problem until it disappears. But what I'm doing as the series goes on is I'm having the villains be less and less, physical threats. Don't get me wrong. I'll be happy to kill many werewolves before this is over. And people shouldn't look too closely at how we portray vampires. But you look at this stuff, and the real danger isn't, some vampire who's pretending to be an acting agent or whatever. It's spiritual darkness. It's hell. It's, I just finished a set where my character Jack Morrow goes into hell to take out his mother, who went down there under a lie to save her son's life. Self-sacrifice. Ooh. And of course, the episode will be released Friday, so just stay a little quiet on that.
When you say the way you phrased it, is he going down there to retrieve his mother or to eliminate his mother?
A retrieve.
Okay, you said he goes in there to take out his mother. I'm like, oh. Ouch.
Spoilers. But so what I do though is,
Orpheus, not I don't.
oh, so one of the best lines I've written is basically Hades going, Orpheus was already mine. What mattered it to me that I let him out for a bit, for a time, which is true. Hey, Orpheus was not a Christian. He was Hades's. Hades was giving out his own property to freedom and would receive it back in the end. But no, speaking back to Christian horror, though, if there's a certain amount of grimdark that is actually inherent in the setting of Christian horror, which is Satan and his minions and those who wish to serve Satan, whether they are deluded or whether they are actually powerful, are real dangers. We make much ado about our various conspiracy theories, but there is a real spiritual evil with some of these men and women who rule this world right now. They are perfectly willing to revel in it. Their fathers were polite enough to at least pretend to be Christian. I don't believe one instant that Rockefeller's priest was any sort of exemplar of the faith, but he went to church. He made sure his children went to church, but he was still very much a tycoon. Somewhat evil, somewhat good, as all men of that kind must be. But the nature that we find in when we walk in and we see somebody defacing a mural or a piece of art that we love, if we respond in violence and rip them apart as they well deserve for defacing a piece of art, we are actually serving Satan in that moment, even if it would be a good thing to do. Instead, one should, for example, figure out who paid him to do that. Follow him a little bit in Minecraft and, figure out who his paymasters are. Some schizophrenic going crazy on the street isn't some LA elite walking into a St. Louis Vietnamese restaurant and talking loudly about how much he pays his schizophrenics, which is a real story that I have sat through myself. It was fascinating. 15 an hour, but you can't use them more than a couple weeks because they go crazy on you. Who knew? These people aren't motivated by werewolf syndrome or a vampire or anything like that. They're motivated by simple greed, or they're true believers in their atheistic death cult that drives them to destroy everything that we hold dear. They are not, the same sort of creature. They are to be witnessed to, but they are never to be agreed with. With vampires and werewolves, it's much easier. At a certain point, people choose and they get too deep. There's a ticket, and then there's the hellspawn driving the train. Those people who are willing to shovel coal into the fire are not beyond redemption, but they're different than some sad drunk who tries to drink his sorrows away, or a woman who's taken too many men, and so she no longer is able to feel her father's love. There's gradients to this. I don't want to say there's mortal sins, because I commit mortal sins on the regular, as much as I wish I didn't. And same with every other Christian.
Well, and it's it does kind of present an interesting problem. Are there people who basically are far gone enough that trying to, on our part, trying to pull them back is not just futile but just going to destroy us?
I believe so.
And yeah, it's I don't and it's it's a kind of another example of someone taking a fictional swing at that idea. In Dante's Inferno, the lowest circle of hell is where traitors are frozen in ice, and he says whenever someone commits treason, in that moment, like even if their body lives, their soul goes straight to hell, and from that point on, their body is run by a demon. And he's kind of talking about the same thing.
There's
in this book, one of the chapters, the sort of human, the Antichrist equivalent, as Chris put it, the human host to 3125. There's an attempt at what may as well be an exorcism, and it doesn't work because it turns out he's not a hapless victim. He chose to embrace this idea and is actively choosing to spread it.
Yep.
And as a result, this gets the SCP Foundation was originally going to kill him with a laser strike from orbit. But this agent instead tries to go and save the human hostage, save the host. And not only does this fail, but as a result, a large chunk of the Foundation gets killed, or at least the chunks that this agent knew about, because of the attempt. This book makes a distinction between the people who are infected and the people who chose to be infected.
There's a certain element that is very careful for the Christian to navigate, and that's whether somebody is receptive to the gospel and whether they can handle sort of truth being told to them. God does protect his evangelists, people who are going out there, until it's time to make a martyr, in which case they're protected spiritually. There's I've seen some crazy things in my life because I've gone out and done witnessing and given out tracts and stuff like that. But I've also seen God's hand in it, and it's very clear who's receptive to the gospel and who's not. It's like the parable of the sower and the seeds. It's prepared ground. Like I work as security at a bar, and I do witness to a lot of people, but sometimes the words just don't come. And so I do whatever ridiculous nonsense comes to mind. One time, some guy was telling me how he was going to return to Albania, and I told him, "Oh yes, I see a great future for you, but let me tell you your fortune. If you're cowardly even for a moment, you will die in that." I have a little fun with it, but there was no way to witness to him. The man was entirely involved in his sort of like get rich quick schemes.
Well, I think one thing to keep in mind is like, okay, you look at like the early church where they were like, basically powerless as far as like politics and, money and stuff like that. And they were facing down the rulers of the world. A lot of times they didn't have a chance of actually changing the ruler's mind. But whenever they stood for what they believed in, even unto death, that's how Christianity spread among everybody watching them. Yeah. So it might not be the person that you're actually like focusing on, but if you carry yourself in that interaction in a way that points to God, then everybody watching you is going to see that.
Oh yeah. And I want to finish my point on Christian horror. We're talking about spiritual dangers as much as we're talking about physical dangers. The essence of Christian horror is not the physical danger of a werewolf, but the spiritual danger of becoming a werewolf.
Mm.
Well, and that's actually something when you started talking about that initially, that was something I thought of a little while ago. There's a book by C.S. Lewis, That Hideous Strength. And George Orwell actually, wrote a, kind of review of this. And on the whole, he recommended it. But he did say, one apparent weakness to him. He said, when one is told that God and the devil are in the conflict, one always knows which side is going to win. The whole drama of the struggle against evil lies in the fact that one does not have supernatural aid. And he's like, okay, if you say, God's on one side, well, God's side is going to win, so where's the tension? And I think this was rather short-sighted of George Orwell, because like it's not just okay, which of these two sides is going to win, it's what's it going to cost them on the way, and what happens to this person and what happens to that person. Is in that book it's Mark and Jane Studdock, are two of the main characters, and are they going to choose, at great risk to themselves and their lives, are they going to choose to do what is right, or are they going to, allow themselves to, be corrupted, allow themselves to become servants to this evil? And like that, if you do it right, that is a very good story. Regardless of, okay, well, the good guys are going to win. Well, I mean, if you read, much, adventure fiction at all, a lot of it, like, yes, the good guys are going to win. How they get there and what it costs them is what makes it interesting.
Yeah, there's no interesting World War II stories because the Nazis are going to lose.
Exactly.
Well, it depends on how you throw it out there. If the Nazis are putting forward their Die Stalin resurrected soldiers with mirror-bright helms to siege the fairy castle, while who are desperately trying to drum up fairy support against the occult wizards under Hitler. You can make it very interesting, but yes, there's no doubt who's going to win.
Side is going to win. Which side is going to win in the end may never be in doubt, but what's it going to cost your hero? Do you build up a very likable? Because if you have just sort of like a square jaw, A-frame hero, he's duty, nothing, no conflicts in my soul, just going to march straight in there and do it. Yeah, that's boring. The other side's going to win. No one cares. If you have an interesting, likable, relatable hero, you're like, this guy live? Because I'm looking at what's stacked against him, and sure, yeah, he practically has to succeed, based on the narrative demands, but does that success give him a way out the other side, or is he spent?
There's a silly analogy I want to draw, but the Superman parody Megamind from, I think, 2010 brings another way of mentioning this. The good guys are going to win. You know which side is going to win. The question is, which side is the protagonist going to be on when the good guys win? Just because the good guys are going to win doesn't mean you'll be on that side when it happens. Not if you make the wrong choices. Conversely, if you're a bad guy, maybe you make the right choices. Maybe you leave. Maybe that's how it happens. Love that movie. Anyway.
Well, and in terms of, again, what it costs you, and this is another part of the closing that I really liked. This is after Adam has taken the Class Z amnestics, and he's his whole life, including large sections that had been wiped out from it, is coming back. It says he is seeing things, and the things he's been being forced to see are hurting him. SCP-3125 has been hacking away at his and her lives for far longer than he knew. They've lost so much by the end. He had no idea. And it's not just him, he realizes. It's everybody. And just a minute later, you used to sing, Adam says, all the time. It's the first thing it took from us. But I remember. And again, the good guys win. But what's it cost them by the end?
In a real world example, going to the other half of the World War II, I know the story of the Battle of Samar very, very well. I know when I see anything related to this, that the underdog American force is going to face an overwhelmingly powerful adversary, and through sheer weight of testicular fortitude, and a couple of key pieces of good luck are going to win a lopsided victory over a force that should have steamrolled them. But then I also know that, men like Ernest Evans, captain of the USS Johnston, they went down fighting. The last time anybody saw him, he was standing on the fantail of a burning destroyer, half his hand shot away, blood all over him, screaming directions down to a auxiliary steering station because the bridge has been blown up, still trying to fight a mortally wounded ship that is smaller than one of the gun batteries on one of the ships he is facing. He wins.
But that doesn't mean it can't be a good story.
His old ship ended up being the second deepest shipwreck we know about. The deepest shipwreck was one that sank a few hundred meters that way and actually made it all the way into the trench that Johnston kind of is hanging over the edge of. So, yeah, watching the victory happen can be as wrenching as wondering who wins.
And, another example of that, like, okay, just from this kind of story, the good guys are going to win. If you look at the Lord of the Rings, if you read this for the first time and you're not a child, like I was probably 12 or 13 when I read this the first time. I don't know if I would have consciously thought, of course, the good guys are going to win. But if you read this for the first time as an adult and you've read a lot of stories before, you probably would think, okay, obviously the ring gets destroyed and the good guys win. But at the same time, get to the end. Yes, they won. And now, but now you have Frodo. And, he's in the most obvious sense, he's missing a finger. And also, he's just horribly psychologically scarred by this whole thing. And then also, the good guys won. The ring is destroyed. And Frodo and Merry and Pippin and Sam come home to the Shire, and they find the Shire, basically torn to shreds, and they have to fight to get that back. And again, it's just because the good guys won doesn't mean, and the good guys were always going to win doesn't mean you can't make an interesting story out of it.
I mean, Sam himself talks about that. They're sitting there, and he's like, Frodo's tired. His soul is worn by his contact with the ring. And, they're talking about stuff, and Sam's like, yeah, these are the stories, the ones that are dark and dangerous and terrible. And you're like, oh gosh, it builds up to the point where you're like, how can they ever have a hope? And it's like, those are the stories you need. Those are the ones that need to end well and that you need to hear and you need to reflect upon, because they're the ones that when things really go badly, it's not some, little pat sugar cube story. It's something that's got blood and bone in it, but you still can see that even through overwhelming odds, it's going to come through. That was honestly one of my favorite moments in there, other than when the troop was kind of standing there eulogizing Boromir, because that was beautiful.
Okay, so I think I've said most of the things, or at least a good number of the things I wanted to say about this book. Chris, do you have any final thoughts, or is there anything we missed that you wanted to touch on before we wrap up tonight?
I think we covered everything I wanted to say.
Nate, how about you?
I've said more than I thought I was going to say, so.
Okay, Harry, do you have any last thoughts for us tonight?
There was a tiny little in-joke that I liked and that Chris might get. something that is done in the SCP Foundation a lot is redaction, where instead of writing the text, you just write out a whole bunch of black boxes, the Tombstone Unicode character. And at one point, when we get to Site 167, the site has been half destroyed by a orbital laser cannon, and the orbital laser cannon has gone in and just line by line reduced the buildings to just black ash. And it's euphemistically called redaction. And it was a one-word choice, and I laughed out loud when I read it, and I was glad that one bit was in here. The author obviously had read a lot of SCP Foundation, was able to make it all work.
Yep.
Okay, and Ben, how about you? Any last thoughts on the book or anything else we've covered tonight?
What are we talking about?
Some-
No.
Somebody had to make the joke, yeah.
Yeah. If people want to write Christian horror, reading something like this is an excellent place to start. It's a great balance of the horror of something that is something that we have to struggle against. And it shows that heroic action on the part of the Christian, even though they might have God in a cell somewhere on site, who knows what, does matter in the end, for the sake of the world, but also for the sake of the souls of everyone around you. If we cannot say, I am willing to sacrifice for God, how can we say that we love all the things that we are supposed to love as Christians? Not that it counts for salvation, but as Christians, the thought form of being saved by Jesus Christ happens to introduce some viral memes that cannot be redacted due to their anti-Memetic nature. And that's how I'm tying it all together from far left field all the way back to home base. Which you can, of course, because I must shill, of course, check out on our podcast, Sunday Superversive Livestream. And if you want to read some real great Christian horror where the dragon has as much to fear from the night as the night from the dragon, do check out Pinkerton's Ghosts on UATV, YouTube, or perhaps your thing of choice if my websites are to be believed.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining me tonight. It's been a very interesting talk, and I will talk to all of you again before long, I hope.
Have a good one.
Look forward to it.